In Bayfield County, nothing ever changed unless it was forced to. The signs still creaked with names of Confederate generals. The town hall still flew a flag just faded enough to excuse its meaning, and folks still nodded politely in public and whispered ugly truths behind closed doors. On paper, Bayfield was peaceful, low crime, good fishing, Sunday markets. But for people like Nia Bennett, black, educated, and unwilling to be silent, peace was something you had to earn and sometimes pay for. Her husband, Daniel, understood that better than most. A man of few words and fewer explanations, Daniel fixed cars on the outskirts of town. He wore his beard neat, his shirts tucked, his eyes down, all by design. He hadn't always lived like that. There was a time, years back, when he answered only to mission clocks and encrypted radios, when his hands didn't tremble at the weight of memory, because they were too busy making sure someone else lived to remember it all. But when he left the army, quietly, without medals or parades, he didn't go looking for trouble. He went looking for silence, and with Nia, he almost found it. She was his opposite in every way that mattered. Loud in laughter, fearless in opinion, always first to raise her hand or her voice. She believed in systems. She believed that change came from showing up again and again, even when the rooms weren't built for people who looked like her, and that belief made her a threat, not to everyone, just to the ones who had spent years crafting a version of Bayfield, where accountability was considered aggression. When she was found shot in the back lot of the county clinic, the official report called it unfortunate. There were no witnesses, no video, her phone, her keys, untouched. The camera behind the loading dock had, apparently, glitched out for the entire hour she lay bleeding behind a dumpster. The case went nowhere, and Daniel said nothing, not. At first, people who knew him, the few who bothered to look past his quiet, said he had always been the kind of man who carried his pain like a packed bag, tightly and only when necessary. But this wasn't grief, not the way others expected it. This was calculation. This was the silence of a man measuring the distance between what he knew and what he was about to become again. What Bayfield didn't know, what the men who pulled that trigger couldn't have known, was that Daniel Bennett had once commanded kill teams under blackout, that he had hunted bomb makers in caves, crossed borders under forged names, and been trained not just to survive violence, but to master it. They didn't know they had taken the one person who had kept him grounded, and that by doing so, they had broken something sacred. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about consequence. Because Daniel didn't return to who he was, he evolved into what he had always feared he could become. And in a town built on the lie that racism was a relic, not a reality, one man quietly began dismantling every layer of that illusion, not with bullets, not at first, but with truth, strategy, and the kind of patience born from combat zones where the enemy was always watching, and the mission never ended when the shooting stopped. This is the story of what happens when a system fails a man who knows exactly how to operate without one, and it begins with silence. Not because he didn't feel, but because he was listening, for footsteps, for lies, for the tremble in a man's voice when he knows the reckoning has already begun. They killed her with silence long before they killed her with bullets. In Bayfield County, silence had always been the most loyal accomplice, more efficient than guns, more permanent than bruises. And when Nia Bennett started raising questions, not just as a nurse, but as a citizen, she was marked. She didn't scream in the streets. She filed paperwork. She documented the patterns. Who got treatment first? Who got ignored? Who walked into their bleeding and left in a body bag? She named the names. She sent letters. She believed, naively. Some said that sunlight was enough to disinfect anything. Daniel had warned her once, quietly, over dinner, the way a man speaks, not to stop someone, but to brace them for impact. This town doesn't like to be reminded, he said. She smiled like she always did when he said things like that. Then maybe it needs reminding. The last time Daniel saw her alive, she was wearing that same smile. It was raining lightly. As she kissed him on the porch before heading to her night shift at the clinic, he stayed outside after she left, watching the mist settle over the street, listening to the rhythmic creak of the old oak swing she refused to let him repair. When the call came 2 hours later, something in his body already knew. The voice on the other end was controlled, polite, practiced. "There's been an incident," the officer said. "We'd appreciate your cooperation." The parking lot behind the clinic was already taped off. Floodlights cut sharp shadows across cracked pavement. A single sheet covered a shape Daniel recognized instantly, even from across the lot. Her shoes stuck out from the edge of the tarp, clean, white soles against black asphalt. No one offered an explanation. A young deputy tried to steer him away. "We're still investigating, sir. Best to let the professionals handle this." Daniel didn't argue. He just stood there, eyes locked on the spot, hands tucked in the pockets of a jacket he barely noticed he was still wearing. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He simply watched the town finish what had started at the funeral. The mayor sent flowers. The sheriff offered a handshake and said, "We're treating this with the utmost seriousness." The hospital where Nia worked issued a one-paragraph statement about a valued employee whose dedication will be missed. No one mentioned the letters she wrote, or the complaints she filed, or the names she tried to protect, the camera that covered the back entrance. The one Daniel himself had helped install for free during a community upgrade had mysteriously gone offline between 9:12 and 10:47 p.m., a gap wide enough to hold the entire murder. The footage from the gas station across the street was inconclusive. No one remembered seeing anything. One man even said he thought he heard fireworks. Daniel went home after the service and didn't sleep. He sat in the kitchen, staring at the tile she'd chosen because it reminded her of her grandmother's house in Georgia. In the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a clock he hadn't noticed in months, something settled into him. Not anger, not yet, but precision. He started with the basics: vehicle reports, dispatch logs. He submitted FOIA requests, cross-checked them with power outage maps, found the exact time the camera failed, found the VIN of a car parked illegally that night near the clinic, registered to a man with militia affiliations. Nothing conclusive, but nothing random. Then he went deeper. He traced chatter in forums where men posted under names like Freeburn88 and American Vessels, threads about cleaning up the gene pool, jokes about the nurse who forgot her place. One post, now deleted, ended with the words, "One down, many more to go." He didn't show anyone, not yet. He knew the pattern too well. Release information too early and the system adapts. They scrub evidence. They close ranks. No. This had to be done carefully, strategically, like the operations he used to run overseas, where time wasn't measured in days, but in moments of exposure, when one slip, one sound meant mission failure or death. Daniel visited the clinic again, 3 days after the funeral, alone. He walked the perimeter at night, not to mourn, but to study, where a shooter might hide, where a getaway vehicle would wait. He marked sightlines, measured angles. He noticed the busted floodlight and the clear imprint of a size 11 boot in the soil near the fence. He began to disappear from the town's routines. No more church, no more grocery runs. At the auto shop, he spoke less. He worked alone. Customers started whispering. Some said grief had broken him. Others said maybe he was planning to leave. No one said what they really feared, that the quiet man with the army tattoos and too many scars wasn't just grieving. He was preparing. What the men who pulled that trigger didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Daniel Bennett had once led units into hostile territory with zero support, that he could strip a weapon blindfolded, read terrain by scent, and anticipate ambushes by the flight path of birds. They didn't know he could function for days with no sleep, survive, off rainwater and instinct. They thought they had taken a life. They didn't realize they had activated a weapon. But Daniel didn't plan to kill. Not yet. That was the difference between vengeance and justice, and Nia had always been on the side of justice. He'd promised her once in a half-whisper beneath the stars, "If anything ever happens, I won't let it go quiet." So he didn't. He started documenting, not just evidence, but systems, who protected whom, which judges dismissed which cases, which officers had family in the Heartland Defense League. He mapped power, not just people, because in towns like Bayfield, guilt was a network, and to take it down, you had to know every wire it ran through. What began as mourning became mission, and in the heart of a town that had buried its sins under polite smiles and broken cameras, Daniel Bennett began writing a new kind of report, one the system couldn't ignore and wouldn't survive. It started with a phone call Daniel wasn't supposed to receive, an old voice from an older life, low and gravel-thick through the static. "You still breathing?" the voice asked. Daniel knew better than to say yes. "I need a favor," he said instead. And just like that, The mission changed. The man on the other end was Jace Monroe, a former field operative who now worked unofficially with an equally unofficial branch of a federal oversight group, not quite DOJ, not quite off the books. He owed Daniel his life twice over, once in Kandahar and again in a burn hospital outside Djibouti. Daniel didn't need much, just access, records, connections, not for revenge, for truth. "I'm not burning anyone," Daniel said, "not unless they already lit the fire." There was silence. Then, "Give me 48 hours. While he waited, Daniel dug deeper. Every town has a weak spot, a crack between the law and those who use it. Bayfield's crack was a man named Garrett. Trask, city council, second-generation local, owns half the real estate on the west side. Trask wasn't in the room when Nia died, but he didn't need to be. He funded the group that protected the men who were. Heartland Defense League wasn't a militia on paper. It was a community resilience network. Daniel had. Read their charter. It used words like sovereignty and heritage. It never once used the word black. Trask's cousin, Paulie, was on the town zoning board. Paulie's son, Devin, had a boot print that matched the one near the clinic fence. Daniel filed that away. Jace came through. He always did. A burner phone dropped at a shipping depot 5 counties away. Inside, a drive, clean, untraceable, with 3 things that mattered. First, dispatch logs from Bayfield PD showing that calls about shots fired near the clinic were delayed by over 18 minutes. Second, a memo from a local DA dismissing a related case after a call from above. And third, a copy of a Homeland Security bulletin listing the Heartland Defense League as non-priority. Rural Protection Unit, low threat. Low threat. They killed a woman in a medical uniform, and they were low threat. Daniel didn't rage. He read the memo 3 times. Then he picked up the black marker beside his desk and wrote one word on the wall of his garage. Above a row of torque wrenches and calipers, leverage, he stopped waiting for the system to respond. He started acting. First, he went to the old grain silo east of town, now a shell of rust and broken windows. It used to be a shipping point. Now it was a meeting place. Heartland boys ran drills there, unofficial, of course, just freedom training. Daniel staked it out from a distance for 3 nights, watched the same trucks come in and out, noted license plates, watched them drink and boast, watched them train. One night, he walked close enough to hear. They talked about Nia, not her name, but what she represented. That uppity nurse, one of them said, should have known better. Another laughed. Well, she won't be testifying. They didn't know who was listening from the shadows. They didn't know their words were being recorded on a high-frequency directional mic. Jace had shipped with the burner phone. Daniel uploaded the audio to a drive, encrypted it, and sent it to 3 sources: a freelance journalist he'd once helped escape a compound in Syria, a civil rights attorney in Atlanta, and an anonymous tip line hosted by a nonprofit watchdog group. Then he waited again. But this time, the silence didn't last. 3 days later, the audio leaked, not on the nightly news, on Reddit, then Twitter, then blogs. The quotes were unmistakable. A screenshot of the memo appeared next, then the delay in dispatch logs. Local activist groups started asking questions. Then the press. Sheriff Colin Rudd gave a press conference under a gray sky, his jaw tight, his statement rehearsed. "We're cooperating with internal review and appreciate community patience." He didn't mention Nia by name. That night, Daniel found a note slipped under his shop's back door. No name, just a line in shaky handwriting. "Careful, they think you're watching." He installed motion sensors around the perimeter of his house, reinforced the locks, sat in the garage each night with the lights off, listening for footsteps. He wasn't paranoid. He was practiced, and he knew that what scared men most was not being attacked, but being revealed. So he revealed them. Daniel released another video, this one showing men in camo running drills at the silo. Faces blurred, but locations tagged, the audio underneath. She should have kept quiet. The video ended with one sentence on the screen: "This is what community looks like when no one's watching." The story broke nationally. MSNBC ran a segment. The CNN analyst said, "This raises serious questions about domestic extremism hiding under the banner of local culture." Fox News called it a smear campaign from an unverified source. The source didn't care. Daniel kept going. He found tax records tying Trask to a shell company that rented the vehicles used that night. Found a contractor who claimed he fixed up a trailer behind the grain silo for someone named Red. Later matched to a known league member. Bit by bit, the pieces formed a map. But here's what changed everything. A whistleblower, a young deputy, name withheld. He sent in a mail through the nonprofit's encrypted form. Said he'd heard the sheriff say, if he keeps poking around, we might need to finish what those boys started. The deputy attached an audio file. It wasn't clear, but it was real. Daniel didn't post that tape. He sent it to a federal office in Charlotte, and that's when the shift happened. 3 black SUVs pulled into Bayfield the next week. No sirens, no press, just quiet men in suits, asking quiet questions. 2 Heartland properties were searched. One was padlocked. A local reporter said agents were collecting materials related to paramilitary training and unlawful surveillance. Suddenly, people stopped laughing. Trask canceled a town hall. Devin deleted his social media. Heartland's website went offline. Sheriff Rudd took temporary leave. Daniel watched it all from the same seat in his garage, sipping black coffee and letting the war unfold without him lifting a weapon. Because sometimes the most dangerous man in a room isn't the one shouting. It's the one who never needed to raise his voice. By the time federal agents started asking questions in Bayfield, the locals had already begun rewriting the story. People who'd once toasted the Heartland boys in backrooms now claimed they'd never really trusted that kind of talk. Pastors reminded their congregations to pray for peace, not vengeance. Even the mayor, who once praised Heartland for community preparedness, stood behind a podium and said, "We had no idea what they were really up to." But Daniel Bennett had always known better. The men who pulled the trigger weren't anomalies. They were products. They weren't rogue. They were rehearsed. It was never about one shooter, not even one sheriff. It was about infrastructure. Behind every hateful act was a chain of permission, spoken or not. The deputy who looked the other way. The council member who shifted zoning laws to allow community drills. The banker who approved the mortgage on a bunker disguised as a barn. The state rep who spoke about rural freedom while handing out campaign flyers at Heartland barbecues. Daniel traced them all. Not with violence, with blueprints. He built charts the way others built bombs, precise, layered, dangerous in their accuracy, each node on the map connected by action. Who funded what? Who shared whose posts? Who intervened in what arrest? He used free databases, dark web archives, interviews masked as friendly conversations. When people spoke, he listened like a surgeon listens to breath before cutting deep. One night, while reviewing footage from an old protest Nia once attended, something small, a healthcare rally 2 years back, he spotted a man in the background, wearing a deputy's badge, standing near a protester being pushed. That protester had later been arrested, charges dropped. No one knew why. Daniel remembered Nia coming home that day, shaking. "They want us tired," she'd said, "tired and afraid. But I'm not playing that game." He replayed the footage again. The deputy in the background was now acting sheriff, Rudd's right hand. His name, Marcus Hale. No formal ties to Heartland. No hate speech online. But Daniel found something better. Old Army records. Hale had served in a military police unit disbanded after reports of disciplinary inconsistencies. Translation, brutality covered up. That thread led to an insurance claim. A fire on Hale's uncle's property 5 years earlier. The cause, a known electrical failure. The payout, $500,000. The beneficiary, a shell company later linked to Garrett Trask. Bayfield was never random. It was a network. Every handshake cost someone silence. Daniel compiled it all, not for the FBI, but for the public. He knew government moved slow. What moved faster was outrage. He created a data drop, encrypted, open source, downloadable by anyone. It had everything: the charts, the voice memos, the meeting locations, the funding trails. No commentary, just facts. He tiled the folder for Nia. He didn't expect it to go viral, but it did. First in niche forums, then on Substack newsletters, then mainstream. Rachel Maddow quoted it. The Intercept requested an interview. Rolling Stone ran a piece called "The Map One Man Built" that brought a county to its knees. The result wasn't just media pressure, it was structural tremble. 2 city council members resigned. A judge recused himself from a civil rights case involving Bayfield PD. Homeland Security classified Heartland as a tier to domestic extremist threat. But the most important shift happened off dash camera. In other towns, emails began flooding in. From Mississippi, from rural Oregon, from upstate New York, people sharing similar stories, similar patterns. We have a group just like that. Our sheriff's brother runs something like this. No one's listening to us. Daniel realized something terrifying and affirming. Bayfield wasn't unique. It was just the first crack in a much larger wall. He responded to a few of the emails carefully, gave advice, suggested safe methods for documentation, connected them with journalists who cared, because this wasn't about his story anymore. It was about the ecosystem that allowed men like Hale, Trask, and the ones who shot Nia to believe they would never be held accountable because the machine they served had no face and no address. But now it had both. And Daniel didn't stop there. He dug into campaign donations, found that a prominent senator had received contributions from a PAC that shared board members with Heartland's founding group. He posted that chart, too. He exposed the contract for riot gear between Bayfield PD and a defense firm currently under investigation for fraud. Another post. And then he went quiet again. Because what comes after exposure is retaliation. He knew the playbook. First discredit, then isolate, then erase. A smear campaign began. Online accounts claiming Daniel was unstable, possibly violent. A fake social media profile with his name started sharing conspiracy theories. A letter was mailed anonymously to his landlord, suggesting Daniel might be planning something. He countered none of it. He stayed in the shadows and let the documents speak. And then something strange happened. Support. A group of veterans posted an open letter supporting his efforts. Lawyers offered pro bono protection. A GoFundMe set up by a former patient of Nia's raised $80, zero for legal defense, in case he ever needed it. Bayfield had tried to bury Nia with silence, but her name had become a code for persistence, for truth, for building where others burned. Daniel never stepped into a courtroom. He never testified. But the system began cracking anyway, because now every official in Bayfield knew there was someone watching who didn't need a badge to dismantle. Their power. And that shift, that invisible turning of the tide, wasn't won by force. It was earned by one man, moving quietly, but with intent. The first apology came by email, short and personal, rooted through a PR firm. It came from the hospital where Nia once worked, the same place that declined to mention her by name in the early press releases. They wanted to recognize her contributions and asked Daniel if he would participate in a planned memorial wall for all fallen healthcare heroes. He didn't reply. The second apology wasn't really an apology. It came from the newly appointed sheriff, a man named Toller, who had been plucked from another county and given the task of restoring trust. At a town hall broadcast on local news, Toller said the department had learned difficult lessons and was committed to transparency. He never said the word murder, never mentioned Nia. But he did say this: we can't fix what we're unwilling to face. It was something, not justice, but something. Daniel watched the broadcast alone, in the garage, with the volume low. He wasn't waiting for redemption. He was tracking signals. A real shift doesn't happen in the spotlight. It happens in policy drafts and budget revisions. It happens when men who once mocked the idea of oversight start attending ethics trainings. It happens when a city council quietly removes the clause in the town charter that allowed emergency jurisdiction extensions. The same clause that had let Heartland operate training zones on public land. That clause disappeared weeks after Daniel's data drop. More importantly, it happened in the school board. A young teacher named Jasmine Moreno proposed a local curriculum update, adding units on civil rights violations within rural America. It passed by one vote. That vote belonged to a woman who once attended Heartland's community brunches. She didn't explain her choice, but later, in a private email Daniel was forwarded by a veteran friend, she wrote, "My husband saw what silence did to that man's wife. I won't let my daughter grow up thinking that's normal." That, too, was accountability. In time, national groups stepped in. The Southern Poverty Law Center opened an investigation into Heartland's funding sources. The DOJ launched a broader inquiry into militia networks using nonprofit status as a tax shield. A regional audit found that over $1.2 million in federal Funds had gone to community groups later linked to racial intimidation practices. Some of those funds were funneled through Bayfield. Daniel never spoke to the press, never took a podium. He let others build what he cleared space for. Because accountability isn't the crash of a courtroom verdict. It's the slow collapse of a lie. One of those lies was that Nia had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. That narrative was shattered. A bronze plaque was installed at the clinic, not by official order, but by Nia's former patients. They raised the money themselves over 6 weeks. The inscription read, "She showed up when others stayed home. She spoke when others stayed quiet. She healed, and they feared her for it." People began saying her name again, not with pity, but with purpose. And Daniel, he began writing. Not a memoir, a manual. Page by page, he compiled what he'd done, how he gathered evidence, how he organized it, how he protected himself while dismantling an ecosystem. It wasn't revenge porn. It was a roadmap, something others could use. He called it Civilian Recon, a field guide for the unseen war. He published it under a pseudonym, released it free online. Within 3 months, it was downloaded over 400,000 times. Activist groups began hosting workshops based on it. Churches used it in youth programs. One police academy quietly added it to their bias response training. No one credited him. That was exactly how he wanted it. Because accountability, when it's real, doesn't look like punishment. It looks like prevention. It looks like systems built in the image of the people they were meant to protect, not in fear of them. The final shift came when the governor of the state, under increasing pressure, announced the formation of a new civilian review board, independent of police, with investigative authority. Bayfield was one of the first counties required to participate. For the first time in its history, oversight was mandatory, and though Daniel never walked into that room, his fingerprints were everywhere. On the new policies, on the encrypted documents, still circulating between grassroots groups, on the silence that had been broken, not just in Bayfield, but far beyond. One night, nearly a year after Nia's death, Daniel returned to the clinic, not during a ceremony, just alone, under streetlight. He stood in front of the plaque, placed a small bouquet of white poppies on the ground, and stayed there for a long time. A woman leaving her shift recognized him, but said nothing. She just nodded, and he nodded back. That moment, quiet and mutual, was the only kind of closure he believed in, because justice didn't bring Nia back, but it stopped her from being erased. And that was enough to keep building. Daniel never asked to be seen as a hero. Heroes, in his view, died early or got statues they never asked for. He wasn't a savior. He was a witness, a man who saw something unholy done to the only person who ever convinced him peace was possible, and refused to let that act become just another local rumor buried under the next news cycle. The town of Bayfield changed, but not in the ways. Headlines like The Promise, the banners still hung from porches. The same voices still called into local radio with phrases like heritage, not hate. But the fear had shifted. It no longer belonged to the quiet ones, the nurses who documented abuse, the kids who asked hard questions in classrooms, the veterans who stayed silent about what they saw in town halls. Now, the fear lived with the men who thought they'd never be questioned, with the sheriffs who assumed the badge made them immune, with the donors who thought they could fund hate behind red, white, and blue logos and never see daylight. That was the true reimagining of justice. Not the arrests, though there were a few. Not the resignations, though several made the news. It was the recalibration of memory. Because Daniel refused to let Bayfield remember Nia as just a casualty. He made sure she was remembered as a cause, a reckoning, a woman who broke the unspoken rule that said, you can speak up, but not too loudly. You can care, but not too much. He made sure that every person who once sat quietly through her warnings now sat with the weight of what they ignored. When he finally left Bayfield, it wasn't with a storm. It was with a note, typed unsigned, left at the foot of the bronze plaque. The day they shot her, they thought they were ending something. But all they did was name what had always been there and make sure it would never be hidden again. That was Daniel Bennett's last word. Not vengeance. Not victory. Just truth, left open, like a wound that finally had a name. And for the first time in years, justice didn't feel like an institution. It felt like a man keeping his promise.